Our next guest is here. Allison, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Nice to have you on our summit. You are going to talk about labels. Don't lie. Are you really telling us the truth? They don't lie?
They don't. They labels can be difficult.
Finding the child beneath the diagnosis. I love it. I love this topic. But I want to take you through your life and show our audience a little bit about you. So she stands for seeing beyond the diagnosis. So every child is known for, she's going to share with us what that is in her presentation. She believes labels can inform support, but must never do something. She is committed to giving parents language and tools that remove something. So better listen. She's going to give you guys tools and it's committed to giving you language and tools, not strategies, language and tools. And she is here to help families shift from seeing what's wrong, because that's what happens, right? When our kids, we just start asking what's wrong, the milestones miss what's wrong, to something. She never told me what it is, but she's here to tell us. Thank you, Allison. Welcome.
Thank you for that great introduction. So, as Kohila mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about distortion. So, my talk is called The Labels Lied. So, my goal here is to help liberate you from deficit based identity traps. So, we tend to use these labels to change what we're seeing in our children, and that's what I want to stop. So, let's take a moment and think for a minute about a child that we know, whether it be our own child or a child in a classroom that we've had, or even a friend's child that you know has one of these labels. And just think about maybe what you know about them. And a lot of times, what's going to come to mind is that label. Many parents carry this unspoken belief that the label creates the identity. Many parents go into searching for a label with the idea that if they just get the right diagnosis, that they'll finally know what to do. They'll finally know how to handle this child. They'll finally know the next steps. But then comes the diagnosis. Maybe it's ADHD, anxiety, depression, dyslexia. The list of the diagnoses keep growing. But the truth is, a lot of times parents walk away from that meeting, that appointment, getting that diagnosis without the relief they thought would come with it. Instead, they're left asking, what does this mean? What do I do with this information? What happens now? And maybe even who is my child now? But what I want you to know is nothing changed. That same child that went into that appointment with you, that same child that didn't have the label or the diagnosis before, is the exact same child that has the diagnosis now. They're still that same incredible, complex, beautiful human that they were before this label was handed to you. And I get it, I've been there. But that belief that a diagnosis will give you all of the answers can actually become a part of the trap. And this is where distortion sneaks in. That diagnosis begins to distort what we see in the child in front of us. So think back to that moment that you first heard your child's diagnosis, if you have been in that situation. Where were you? Who was in the room? What was the first thing you felt? Was it fear, confusion, relief? And now ask yourself, has that label brought any more clarity or any more questions? Probably more questions than clarity. And I'd like to also point out that distortion doesn't just happen when a child takes on the identity of the label. It can come from the adults around them. So even well-meaning parents, teachers, or caregivers may start to change the way they treat, talk to, or what they expect from a child once they know about this diagnosis. I've seen it happen many times myself, and I'm here to help remind you that the labels can lie. So I would like to tell you about one of my students that I coach. We're going to call him M. He has bright eyes, he's funny, he has so much curiosity, and every time I would ask him to try something new or to do something out of his comfort zone, he would say, I can't, I have ADHD. Or I just am this way because I have ADHD. And it stopped me in my tracks, because what I was hearing wasn't just him explaining his behavior, it was him internalizing his label. He believed that his diagnosis wasn't just a part of him, it was all of him. And this is what happens when distortion takes over. The child becomes the label. Their strengths, their creativity, their humor, everything else gets buried beneath a checklist of symptoms. And M is not the only child that I've heard this from. I've heard it from similar students across all ages, especially when I was teaching. Kids that feel limited by a label, and they start to build these strong limiting beliefs about themselves at such a young age. And in today's fast-paced, mass consumption world, where kids are reduced to grades, test scores, and quick labels, sadly, our children are learning to know that their diagnosis is who they are, or they're beginning to think that their diagnosis is who they are. And they're learning their diagnosis just as well as they know their own name. So most of the students that I've worked with who have a diagnosis can tell you every detail about their label, but not so much about what they're proud of or what makes them who they are. And that right there is distortion. Once I realized that M, my coaching student, wasn't just repeating his diagnosis, that he had actually absorbed it, realized that he needed a new framework, a way to understand what was happening inside of him, and a way to just explain that these symptoms that he saw as deficits were all about different patterns that we could work with through regulation and ownership. So I made this great, we turned it into a game for him because he was a younger student. We came up with this great game called Brain Detectives, and it became a color-coded brain map. So we talked about his green brain being his rest and calm space where he's focused and connected, and his yellow brain was a warning zone where maybe he was a little triggered or uneasy. And his red was full fight or flight, reactive, overwhelmed. And then we added in an orange brain, and that was his impulsivity. That was that extra energy that was really unique to his ADHD. And adding in this orange was really key to this game that we played, because impulsivity for him was who he had become. And I wanted him to know it wasn't just about having ADHD, it was about choices, and it was about learning how his brain works. So when we talked about our brain states and something happening to him and shifting from different brain states, he suddenly had some more language to go with this and a little more ownership in his behavior. And what really changed about him was not just that he had this new language, but he started to act differently. He's an evidence-based kid, and he needed to understand why his brain did what it did and why it worked the way it did. And once he did, he realized that he wasn't broken, and he didn't have this debilitating situation that was hovering over him anymore. I taught him about his amygdala and his prefrontal cortex, and we talked about his nervous system, and he really began to internalize all of it, and he really took it to heart. And he stopped saying things like, I can't, I have ADHD. And he started actually using the words that we talked about. And he would say, I'm shifting into my orange brain right now. I need a rest, or I need to reset, or I need a break. He started taking ownership of the things that he knew would help shift his behavior. And that right there is self-awareness, and that is him moving out of distortion and into ownership. So it was fulfilling to just see his identity restored and see him identifying with who he really is. And that is what we all do here as holistic neurogrowth success coaches. We guide children back to ownership of their inner systems instead of allowing them to be reduced by outer labels, because it's all about remembering who they are beneath the distortion. So I want you to take a minute and think about what this might look like with your own child or your students if you don't have a child in this situation, but maybe you have students that are. And think about what would happen if instead of asking them, why did you do that? Or why are you acting that way? You were able to pause, soften your voice, and simply ask them, what color do you think your brain is right now? That one question could change everything. It could move your child out of shame and into self-awareness. And it says, I see you, I'm here with you, and let's figure this out together, instead of shifting the blame to them that they've done something wrong. And it's not a perfect science, we're all human, but taking those few moments to just take a step back and help them be more self-aware can make all the difference in the world. So what I want you to remember, if you don't remember anything else, what I want you to take away is that you can honor and support the needs of your child and their label and their diagnosis while still honoring who they are. You don't need to let the diagnosis explain them anymore. You can let the diagnosis explain how your child moves through the world, but not who they are. So instead of focusing on a diagnosis, I would love for you to lean into what you already know to be true about your child. What if the real issue isn't a delay, but a disconnection in how they're seen and who they really are? What I know to be as an absolute truth is that there is no label, no matter how accurate or how helpful or how well-intentioned, that can truly contain a whole human. Distortion tries to reduce people to a set of symptoms, but we have the power to remember who these children are and who they have always been. You don't need anyone's permission to see what's always been there. Your child, in all of their fullness, all of their complexity, all of their brilliance, and all of their quirkiness, the label might describe one little part of them, but it does not define who they really are. And your job, just like my job as a coach, my job was as a teacher, my job as a mom, our job is never to fix the children. It's never to fix the person in front of us because they're not broken. Our job is to guide them, to see them, to remind them who they are and that they've been this person all along and that they've just been waiting to be seen. So before I move on to a few maybe reframing sentences that we can use and a few things that we can say instead of what we usually would have as a knee-jerk reaction, I'd love to hear how this has shown up for anyone. If you have a child with a label, I know it's more and more common, or maybe you have a label yourself. This is not just, we can very easily fall into these traps ourselves.
Here's a question.
Sure. How can we rewire their ways on how they see themselves and how teachers and tutors see this child? So that is a very complex question because there's so many moving parts there, right? So we can rewire how they see themselves by just changing the way we approach things and the way that we talk to them. Maybe instead of saying, you have too much energy or you need to calm down, maybe saying, what are you feeling in your body right now? Do you need a quick reset? Do you need to get some energy out? And just reframing it as something that is just their normal, not something that's wrong with them. When it comes to teachers and tutors, that's where it's a completely different set because you don't have that complete control over how they're talking about or how they view your child. But really take advantage of any opportunity that you have to communicate with them the way that you see your child. Communicate with them that, yes, you may know your child has this label, but that is not who they are. And it is very easy to get very defensive when we talk about our own children. But when we are communicating with them, just coming at them with some compassion and understanding that they are dealing with a much bigger system at hand as well. The school system is full of students with labels and preconceived notions of many students that are coming their way just because of the labels. So just having that quick talk with them. Yeah, my child has ADHD and we're working on different ways that we can reframe that and help him control his impulses and ask for breaks. But I want you to also know this and this about my child because that's who he really is at the core. Kim, how can we help shift the adults' perception? Same thing, particularly those in the school systems. And I think it's just constantly having those conversations, going to those meetings, going to those open houses, communicating in emails or whatever type of communication that your teachers use is so important to just constantly have this type of language at the forefront of all of those conversations. Yes, Vanessa, so many things get missed. So many things get missed because these children, like children with ADHD, have so many amazing strengths that get missed because we're spending so much time trying to tell them to slow down, to calm down, to calm their bodies. They say kids with ADHD hear so many more negative redirections than your average child. That can really put a damper on a lot of their creativity. So really remembering who they are at their core, and that the ADHD just helps to define some of their behaviors, or the anxiety just defines some of their behaviors, is really a huge refocus.
Kristen has a question.
Helping parents become aware that labels are creating distortions. I think just coming at the parent with a question, tell me about your child. And if that's one of the first things that they tell you about their child, when you are mirroring back to them what they've said, mirror it with all of the great things that they told you about their child, and then add with, and I hear that your child has some behaviors that they're working with due to their insert label, and just reframing it to them as a way that actually all these other things you told me about your child are really who they are. I think it's a lot of our language that we can talk about. Instead of saying, maybe for an anxiety situation, instead of saying they have anxiety, or if a child, you're hearing them say all the time, I can't, I have anxiety, help them reframe it and give themselves some affirmations that are maybe like, my brain isn't safe, doesn't feel safe right now. I need to help it feel calmer. Or if a child is always saying that they're worried about something, you could help them reframe it by telling them that their brain just notices so many details, and it can be a strength, but it can be overwhelming. So let's work through those details. Children that have a diagnosis that actually impacts their performance in the classroom academically can be really hard too. I think of a child maybe with dyslexia, or a child that struggles with a learning disability. They might say, I'm dumb, I can't do that. Just reframe that you just learn in a different way. We just need to find out the way that your brain wants to know this information. And maybe, I know my son particularly has dyslexia, and we always told him, you can do everything that everyone else can. You might just have to work a little bit harder or a little bit differently to figure out how your brain wants to do it. And that always seemed like a much better way to reframe it for him. Because a lot of these kids will say, I'm just bad at school, or I'm just bad at making friends. And that can really just turn into a whole identity for them that will follow them because they're telling themselves these things. That's another thing that I teach all of my students, is that your brain is going to listen to whatever you tell it. So if you tell your brain you can't because you have ADHD, or you can't because you're bad at it, or you can't because you have anxiety, then you're right. You're not going to be able to do it. But if you say, oh, I didn't learn this in a way that made sense to me, can somebody explain it to me differently? That's a complete reframe, because it's not that they can't learn it, it just didn't make sense to them that way.
Annie has a comment.
I find myself using paddles with teachers to try to bring forward understanding and empathy. Yes, the empathy. Oh, absolutely. That tapping into that empathy and compassion, because teachers are teachers because they want to help kids. They love kids. They have the compassion and the empathy. But when you are in a system that is constantly label forward, it can really change the way you come at things. So if you approach them with that understanding and empathy and compassion reframe, that can make all of the difference in the world. And just stepping back, reminding them, we're in this together. I want to help you understand my child. That can be just a huge shift in the right direction. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, and I think when it becomes a badge, because when I used to work with all the students, the first thing that'll come out is it's like a badge.
Yeah.
So I have autism, and they'll put it out at you as, don't pass that. There's a boundary here. I'm drawing it, and don't pass that. Don't even try helping me because they've taken it as their identity. It's when that crosses into identity, that's where as parents and coaches and teachers, everyone has to be careful about that label when it crosses over. Notice that with your coaching students?
Absolutely. I can remember one conversation I had with a student, and they were running all over the room and they were playing around. And we did a calming activity, which is sometimes a quick breathing activity can help. And he said, I just do that because I have ADHD. And I said, guess what? So do I. And I'm not running around the room because I found different ways that will help me. And he was like, there's no way you have ADHD. You're not running around the room. So we talked about how there's different ways to handle different situations. And even just the simple fact that he doesn't run around the room in school, but he does at home, he was like, I don't at school because I have to be at my desk, but at home, I don't have to be at my desk. I have to be running around. Those were just stories that he told himself that he began to completely understand and completely believe to be his hard truth. So it was tough unlearning that and rewiring that for him because kids are learning who they are every day. And when they have told themselves a story about who they are and they fully believe it, telling them that you can reshape these different things about you and about your behaviors, that can be tough for them when they've become to know it as truth, even if it's a part of them that's difficult. Our nervous system finds safety in what we already know.
Especially the stories that starts with I have, I should, because we've already declaring it. Those words are so strong. And especially
Absolutely.
when you're young, it imprints and it wires it so strongly. So
It
it's
does. I tell all of my students, especially the younger ones, how lucky they are and fortunate they are to learn all of these things about themselves at a young age, because I know so many adults that still struggle with these identities that they have given themselves. We all do it. Even if we don't have a label, we may say, like you and Gina were talking earlier about the different ways that we want things set up. And we may tell ourselves, I need this and this, and we begin to believe that we need this and this, and then we inevitably find ourselves in a situation where we can't control our environment, and it's uncomfortable because we have convinced ourselves and we are a certain way. So as we're teaching these younger children to be more adaptable and to be more flexible in their own thinking, I meet a lot of adults who are not self-aware enough to be able to make those shifts or to be able to identify even why they're feeling the way they're feeling. So I think being able to identify that is huge.
I also want to talk about before you go, because this is so important for parents and educators to hear, is that when we're like pushing for these labels, but we're at the end of the day, parents and many parents that we talk to and join their journey, at the end of the day, they are still left with so many questions. And now what? There's papers and paperwork, and all these things are being written up about their kids. But at the end of the day, but now what?
Exactly. And a lot of times that now what turns into many accommodations in the classroom that may be serving them right now. But I personally feel like at the end of the day, when those accommodations don't get phased out, they become a crutch that these children are not going to leave the school system with, because the world is not going to give these IEP accommodations that you have in the classroom. So I personally think it is so much more important to teach them about themselves and how they can work with what they have in the world instead of expecting the world to work with what they have. And that is a huge struggle that I had when I was in the classroom. It's a huge struggle that I have with my own child who has an IEP due to his dyslexia, is that the world is not always going to give you these accommodations. I want to teach you how to work in the world with what you have.
Yeah, that's where I feel so sad that we send our kids with accommodation into the real world. The
Mm-hmm.
real world doesn't have anything set up for them. Really, we have to get them to succeed in real life, not fail. But our school system, as they exit, as you say, we're not setting that up. So it's very, very heavy. Yeah. And
It's
what about
more
parents? Go ahead. Go ahead,
It's
sorry.
important for parents to know that they have a lot of control over the types of accommodations that their children have, especially as they go into middle school and high school. They can request that some of these accommodations be pulled back a little bit to help them learn how to navigate before they're out into the real world.
So, what about a parent who just got newly diagnosis, or they're like a lot of kindergartens are starting now, schools are starting, and sometimes your child is rejected, like you're not able to put them into the school you want because they don't have the accommodations or they think it's heartbreaking. Your kids not want to live in that school, or you can get them into the same school or her. So, what about those parents sitting at home right now with these all these diagnoses, all these labels are here, but what do I do now?
So that's such a great point, and a lot of parents try to get ahead of the curve by getting these diagnoses early. But your child is so young and growing so much that if there's no like immediate need for a safety need or a medication need, I feel that waiting a little bit might be helpful. Or if you do get the diagnosis, treading lightly on that diagnosis until you get to see your child as they're evolving and growing. Because we, as much as society puts us all in these little boxes of when we should do certain things, we aren't all carbon copies of each other. We aren't all going to do the same things in the same order, and we're not all going to automatically pick up on things just because of an instruction that we were given. We're all going to develop at different rates, and sometimes I feel like people lean on the diagnosis that their child has to say why they haven't met a certain goal or milestone, when really it's just because maybe they're human and they are just on a different path than this box that they've been put in.
Yeah, and also like now I hear so many new labels. Other day I saw that digital syndrome or something like that. And then also we must not forget as coaches and educators and parents that we had something called COVID, where we all had to shut down and stay at home, and our kids were under mask. And those years that they were inside and isolated, that creates a lot like they're going to have newly names for these, like there's social interaction stuff. You don't
Mm-hmm.
just come back out of isolation and say, okay, I'm ready for socials now. Right, you
Right.
don't. And that's why our young generation is struggling.
Absolutely. And to go right along with that, we are raising children in a world that we know nothing about. This world is changing so rapidly, and they are growing and evolving in this rapidly changing world. Just the amount of technology and the increase in the usage of AI and all of these different things, we not only didn't grow up with it, we're learning as we're going as well, but they're learning as they're developing, and they're learning about the world around them, which is a very uncertain world at times, especially when you think back to COVID. They thought that the world was, they had these things figured out about the world, and then COVID hit, and everything they thought they knew was up in the air. So their worldview has been jumbled up so many times. And then instead of trying to give them the space and the time to figure it out, we're trying to figure out what's wrong with them when they're just humans trying to figure out their way through the world just like we are, but they're still developing.
So what's the message to the parents listening right now?
So my message is, if you search for a diagnosis, if you have a diagnosis for your child, there's nothing wrong with that. That can help give you some great information, but just use it as that, just some information to help explain some of the behaviors or some of the things you're seeing, and help guide some of the things that you do with your child or some of the supports that you give them. But do not let it take over who your child is. They're still that same amazing child before you even thought about getting a diagnosis. They're still that same person. They're still learning, they're still growing. And whatever you're seeing in them right now, you may not see in them next year or in 5 years. And it's our job to be facilitators for them and to help guide them in the right directions. And I think a lot of times we use these labels to control certain things or try to control the environments. But we just need to be those guides and those facilitators for our children.
It's also when the newly diagnosis that comes in, and then the panic and all the extreme, and then if you're married, and then how you have to interact with the partners to make sure that it's all happening and we're putting together and everybody's on the same page. There's so much. It's not easy to, but that's why I say label is one thing, but what we do afterward is everything.
Exactly. There's so many stakeholders. There's the parents. There's maybe grandparents that are involved. There's the school. There's so many different people that are involved, and getting everybody on the same page can be overwhelming sometimes. So I think just trying to make sure that everybody sees this label as maybe an assisted piece of information instead of who they are, that will help reframe the entire situation.
Yes. Sometimes we just start putting that lens or the new glasses that comes with the diagnosis. Now I put it on and I see through that everything. That's why it doesn't work. You can't do that. There's still your child. The child is a child. It doesn't change just because this label got added. They just need the way they learn. You need to look at their soul print.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, it can be really easy to say, oh, now I understand why they do this. It's because of their diagnosis. And oh, that makes sense now. Instead of just realizing that, no, they act that way because they are a very unique individual, just like the rest of us. We all have different personalities. So they begin to substitute their child's growing personality as the label sometimes.
Yes, even with your son, with he having the dyslexia, you didn't just take some other random tips or strategies and put it onto him. You had to really study him, no? You have to sit
Absolutely.
with him. You have to sit with him, no?
We had to learn exactly what it was that was going to help him. And teachers told us that he had severe ADHD because when it came time to read, he was playing with something on his desk or doing something because he was struggling. So he was trying to find something else to do. So I could have just said, oh, he has severe ADHD and that's that. But I thought, I don't see that in him. And it took a lot of digging to figure out what was going on. And then once we figured out what was going on, it took even more digging to figure out exactly what was going to help him. And there was a lot of trial and error. And I'd love to tell you I did everything right, but I didn't, I'm sure, because I'm a human. But I made sure that he understood that his brain processed things differently, but it didn't change anything about what he's capable of and who he is.
Yeah, ADHD, you can harness a lot of superpower. Yes. I've worked with hundreds of students like that. The only thing I've learned is so many ways that they can think that I can't think. Have you ever sat with them and get amazed by the ways that even my husband has ADHD? Same thing, the way that he thinks. I cannot think because I don't have that ability. So it's superpower.
So creative.
So creative outside that, but I can. I sometimes box myself and think, but he can go outside. So that's ADHD superpower. And it's the autism too. I've seen kids with autism, they solve things so differently, and I'm like, it can be done like that. Whoa. Because that's where I picked up all of my knowledge from them. They were teaching us. If you watch them, they teach you so much, so much.
I worked with a little boy with autism for 3 years, and I think I learned more from him than I've probably learned from anybody else. And he was first grade through third grade when I worked with him, but I worked one-on-one with him for 3 years. And he just had such an amazing perspective and view of the world that it just opens you up to all these different things that you don't see day to day.
Yes, I'm going a little over here because this is very important because we are a label. We like to separate, compartmentize, fragment everything, and then we like to look at it from this side and this side instead of looking at it as whole. So it's really important if you're a parent or teacher or educator, look at it as holistic. This is a whole person. They didn't come with that label. They didn't born with that label. We're just looking through that lens of it so we can understand them a little bit, but that doesn't mean they are that, because I see it so much. And especially now, kids are hyper sometimes. Kids are, if they're watching all these electronic stuff, they get hyper. I had parents come to me and they say, he's 3 and he's not sitting for 30 or more minutes and doing his work. 3-year-olds don't sit. I don't know any 3-year-old that sit. If I was 3-year-old, I wouldn't sit either. I'm like, I gotta go.
Exactly.
So, but we're changing the expectation. And if you take that child to a specialist, they might think, oh, or they might tell them that he's too young to be diagnosed, hopefully. But if somebody else doesn't pick that up and says, yeah, let's, and then we go to medication very quickly. So we got to be very careful that we expectation as age, and then we follow the bell curve and we follow the milestones. Sometimes we're all different. I might not have the same milestone as another person. I might be
Exactly.
little. I might just take my own time to get there, but that doesn't mean I have this or that.
Exactly. And just because your child is maybe below the curve over here, instead of hyper focusing on that, why don't you take a look at where they are really excelling? Because that's who they are. Let's really lean into where they're excelling and explore that some more.
Yes, look at it as a whole person. It's so important. That's why I don't do anything fragmented or compartmentalized, because it's about holistic, and you are a holistic neuro growth learning success coach. So you have a gift for somebody that you are going to
I
work
do,
with.
I
So can you
do,
share with us?
absolutely.
Yes.
I also have a slide that I just put up too that has some information.
Sure.
So if you email me, my email is allison@successforlife.coach. Up there at the top, my QR code will take you right to an email as well. I'd be happy to share with you that Brain Detectives PDF game that I told you about. Or if you feel that maybe that's not for your child specifically, or you'd like some more information, I would love to also offer a complimentary session where we can talk about how you can help your child, whether they're in elementary, middle, high school, whoever they are, become the best version of themselves. Because at the end of the day, I want you all to remember that life is a journey, it is not a destination. Together, we're going to navigate all of these challenges, break through the blocks, and celebrate every victory along the way.
Thank you, Allison. It's an amazing presentation or conversation. I think we have more conversation. So
Yeah,
thank you. And you should see the chat. You should go and look at the
I can
chat.
go through
There's
and take
so
a
much
look.
there. We couldn't put up all of it, but there's so much because this is a hot topic and it can be used as a great ways, and it could be used as a hostage for the rest of your
Yeah,
life.
we've got to find
So,
that happy medium, that nice balance.
yes, thank you. So thank you, Allison.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.